I am in the middle of not in the middle, I'm at the tail end of a series that I entitled Relentless. And when I thought about what to do this morning, whether it would be sort of a one-off message or whether I would just continue the series, I said, for so many people who say they watch weekly online, I just need to continue the series. So this is part 5 of a series that I've entitled Relentless. Next week will be the final week, part 6. And then the week after that, Stacy is preaching because I will be in Miami at a music festival all weekend with my kids, okay? And I'm not gonna miss you guys at all while I'm there. But I wanna focus your attention this morning on Matthew chapter 26. I'm gonna read verses 30 through 35, and then I'm gonna skip to verse 69 and read through verse 75. So Matthew chapter 26, beginning in verse 30. Then they sang a hymn and went out to the Mount of Olives. On the way, Jesus told them, "Tonight, all of you will desert me. For the scriptures say, God will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have been raised from the dead, I will go ahead of you to Galilee and meet you there." Peter declared, "Even if everyone else deserts you, I will never desert you." Jesus replied, "I tell you the truth, Peter. This very night, before the rooster crows, you will deny 3 times that you even know me." "No," Peter insisted. "Even if I have to die with you, I will never deny you." And all the other disciples vowed the same. And then verse 69. Meanwhile, Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard. A servant girl came over and said to him, "You were one of those with Jesus, the Galilean." But Peter denied it in front of everyone. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. Later, out by the gate, another servant girl noticed him and said to those standing around, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." Again, Peter denied it, this time with an oath. "I don't even know the man," he said. A little later, some of the other bystanders came over to Peter and said, "You must be one of them. We can tell by your Galilean accent." Peter swore, "A curse on me if I'm lying. I don't know the man." And immediately the rooster crowed. Suddenly, Jesus' words flashed through Peter's mind. "Before the rooster crows, you will deny 3 times that you even know me." And Peter went away, weeping bitterly. You know, there is a reason that I can't stop talking about grace. There's a reason why there is only one bullet in my chamber, namely grace. And it's because everything else exhausts me. Everything in this world feels transactional. The pressure to be better, to achieve more, to find love, to be more successful, to push past the anxiety, the fear, it's all around us. Everything not grounded in grace is just about trying harder. And I've tried that. I still try that. I've tried pushing myself to do more, to be more, and all it does is wear me out and leave me discouraged. Grace is the only thing that doesn't make me feel like I'm constantly losing, like I'm constantly falling short. This is why Christianity is ultimately good news, because it's not a message about better behavior. It's not a message about self-improvement. It's not a message about becoming more, becoming all that you can be. It's not a message about proving ourselves, overcoming destructive patterns, or finally learning how to fly straight. It's not ultimately about any of those things. It's a message of grace. It's a message of God loving us and accepting us because he is good, not because we are good. It's a message of rest, not work. It's a message of receiving love, not achieving it. It's a message about freedom from the guilt and shame of feeling like a less than. The goal of Christianity, believe it or not, despite what you may have heard, the goal of Christianity is not to give you good advice or good techniques on how to live a better life. It's not primarily to show you how to have healthier relationships, how to stop bad habits, how to love God more. That's not the goal of Christianity. The goal of Christianity is to make you free. Jesus told us that in his own words. In Luke, when he announced his personal mission statement, I have come to set the captives free, to give sight to the blind. I've come to rescue people and to set them free, to liberate them. So the goal, the mission of Christianity is our freedom, our freedom. Freedom from the need to be strong. Freedom from the need to win. Freedom to fall apart. Free to cry, to laugh, to fail, to risk, to cuss, to explore, to bring our whole selves to God. Free to be honest about your flaws, free from the pressure of wearing masks, free from the fear of being fully found out. My friend Nick Lannon years ago told me this story. Whether it's true or not, I don't care because it's funny. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the guy who invented Sherlock Holmes, he did this as sort of a social experiment, but he sent an anonymous telegram to 12 prominent men in London. And all the telegram read was, "Flee at once, all has been discovered." And every single one of them left town. All of them left town. I mean, the fact of the matter is, we are afraid. There is a part of all of us that are afraid that people will find out we're not as good and clean and selfless and competent and sweet and kind as they think we are. Every single one of us, without exception, at some level, fears being discovered. Every single one of us. We want to feel free from that trauma of fear. I do. When I think about freedom, I think about freedom from things like my insecurities, my haunting fears, the shame that seems to overshadow my life, the regrets that get in the way of my enjoyment of this present moment. I want to feel free from that stuff. We want to feel free from the stress of trying to control everything in order to feel safe. We do that in some explicit ways, and we do that in some very subtle ways, ways we may not even be aware of. We want to feel free from the debilitating disappointment that happens when others fail us. We've all experienced that. The disappointment, the paralyzing disappointment that happens when someone we love fails us, someone we've been counting on fails us. We want to feel free from the bitterness and resentment that sets in when our expectations aren't met. I want to feel free from that stuff. Grace alone frees us from these things by reminding us that we are fully known, fully discovered, and fully loved by the one that matters most. And that there's nothing we can do to be unloved or unaccepted by him, regardless of what you've done, what you're currently doing, or what you will inevitably do. That truth alone is where we get our worth. It's where we get our value. It's where we get our security. It's where we get our significance. It's where we get our identity. As I've said many times, who you truly are has nothing to do with you, despite what the world is telling you constantly. Who you truly are has nothing to do with you. You are not defined by what you do or don't do, who you are or who you aren't. You're not defined by your worst moments or your greatest accomplishments, your struggles or your successes, your strengths or your weaknesses. You are defined by God's unconditional love and acceptance of you. You don't define yourself, God defines you. You are defined. Your identity is a gift from God. It's not something you have to manufacture. It's not something you have to work for or work towards. You are who God says you are. And he says you are his, my beloved. That's who you are. So the focus of Christianity is not the amount of love I have for God. It's the amount of love God has for me. And we see that contrasted explicitly in the verses that I read. Explicitly. Peter's confidence was massively misplaced. Massively misplaced. I mean, his confidence was in his love for Jesus, his devotion to Jesus, his loyalty to Jesus, his commitment to Jesus. I mean, Peter never had a problem voicing his devotion to Jesus. Never. He was always the first to shout out, I'm the most committed. I'm the most loyal. I'm the most devoted. He was confident in his commitment to Jesus. He was proud of his love for Jesus. He was convinced that his devotion to Jesus was solid and that it would carry the day. I mean, verse 30 says, when they had sung a hymn. Seems like a throwaway verse. What does that have to do with anything? I mean, what does that have to do with anything that is going to follow about Jesus telling the disciples that they were going to abandon him and Peter saying, I'll never abandon you? I mean, why include verse 30 here? When they had sung a hymn. Well, interestingly, almost every Bible scholar is certain that they sang Psalm 136. It's almost unarguable. How they know that, I don't know, but they do, and there are smarter people out there, historians, who know these things, and they're almost all of them are certain that they sang Psalm 136. Well, what relevance does that have? Psalm 136 is 26 verses long, and 26 times. So in every verse of Psalm 136, the common refrain is, his steadfast love endures forever. What an important song to sing on the night he was betrayed, on the night he was abandoned, on the night that Peter was expressively voicing his devotion to Jesus. What Jesus is doing there is that before he goes to the cross, he wants to drive home to his disciples and to us that it is his love for them, not their love for him, which endures forever. So, verse 31, is that right? Verse 31? Verse 31. On the way, Jesus told them, tonight all of you will desert me, for the scriptures say God will strike the shepherd and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. Right before that verse, they're singing this song about the steadfast love of the Lord that never ceaseth. Ceaseth. It's not an easy word to say, okay? Don't laugh at me. You wouldn't have done any better, all right? And I'm tired. Damn it, I'm tired. Give me some grace. I mean, I'm trying to quote the King James, sound poetic, fancy, Shakespearean. Screwed that up. Pride comes before a fall. Well, Peter's like, there's no way. No way. He says, though they fall away, I will never fall away. They're chumps, Jesus, not me. I mean, I can very easily see, Jesus, them running away from you, not me. I will go to you, I will go with you to the death. They want to get to you, they're going to have to come through me. I got you. Where's his confidence? Not in that Jesus has him, but that he's got Jesus. And then when Jesus tells Peter that before the night is over, Peter, will deny him 3 times, Peter responds, not me. You've got that wrong. I will die with you. I will die with you. I will not be the one who denies you. It actually, we laugh, but it sounds like a lot of us. I mean, we put an inordinate amount of trust, whether you realize it or not, in the sturdiness of the promises we make, in our ability to resist the bad, to stay true and strong and faithful to the end. We delude ourselves into thinking we have what it takes to follow through, convincing ourselves that our determination alone will keep us safe, will sustain us, will keep us on the right track. We operate with a high anthropology. We think we're stronger than we are. We think we're better than we are. We're more committed than we are. We're more faithful than we are. And this blinds us to our own fragility and limitations. I mean, what happens with Peter here happens with me every day. Every day. I mean, given the right set of circumstances, we're all capable of breaking every promise we've ever made. Tanking our lives and selflessly sacrificing everything we love. July 8th, 1994, I stood before family and friends. It was, by the way, the last wedding ceremony that my grandfather performed. And I promised to love and to protect my wife, forsaking all others till death do us part. I promised to care for my family. And I flushed it all. Flushed it all. The preacher boy flushed it all. The Christian flushed it all. Trust me, you are capable of failing in a way that is unthinkable to you right now. Unthinkable. Don't make the mistake of banking on your integrity, your strength, your promise-keeping ability, or your anything. We are far weaker, far more selfish, and far more vulnerable to disaster than we think we are. We fold easily under the right mixture of pressure. Easily. Without resistance. Peter's failure is our failure reflecting back at us. That's why it's here. This story isn't here to demonize Peter. This story is here to help us know ourselves, to see ourselves in what Peter is doing, saying, and failing to do. Peter's love and promise fails miserably. I mean, just like Jesus said, Peter denies him 3 times. And with each denial, there is an increase in intensity. So first, he denies that he was with Jesus. Then he denies that he even knows Jesus. Then he denies, or then he curses and swears an oath that he does not know Jesus. Luke chapter 22, verse 61 adds this verse to this scene. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Can you imagine? There was an old Jesus movie that my mom and dad took us to in the theater back in the early 80s. I think it was just called Jesus, to be honest with you. And I remember going as a little kid, I was probably, 8, 9 years old. They took us one Sunday afternoon, the whole family, to see this movie. And this is the scene I remember the most. For some reason, I don't know what God was trying to tell me as a young boy, but this was the scene I remember the most. That scene where Peter denies again, the rooster crows, and from across the courtyard, Jesus, who had been beaten and maligned all night long, made fun of, sitting in the courtyard in shackles, just, catching his breath for a moment before the next round of torture started, looks over at Peter. And the look in his eye is not, "I told you so, you dumbass." That's not what, that wasn't the look. Okay, the look in his eye was just pure tenderness. Pure tenderness. Peter's love did not carry the day. Peter realizes his heartbreaking failure. His promise and devotion melted as soon as the heat turned up. His professed love for Jesus faded in the face of a threat to his well-being. So, whose love endures forever? Not Peter's, not ours. I've discovered that the only steady rhythm in my faith is how unsteadily I practice it. It's the only constant. The only consistency in the practice of my faith is how inconsistent I am in practicing my faith. I trust God with some things and not with others. I believe and I doubt in the same breath. I love God and I betray him all in a moment. I follow him, then flee from him. I rejoice, then rebel. If my hope were anchored in the strength of my faith, I'd be lost, screwed. But here's the good news. God's love, as proven here, does not flicker in the shadow of our faithlessness. Even when we are faithless, he is faithful. The unyielding strength of his faithfulness is never, ever tethered to the fragility of our belief. Ever. We are loved by a God who forever leans toward us, even when, especially when, we turn away. His steadfast love endures forever. His steadfast love to you personally, individually, endures forever. Nothing in this life endures forever. Nothing. Seasons come, seasons go. People come, people go. Health comes, health goes. I mean, nothing in this life, everything in this life has a beginning and an end. Life has a beginning, it has an end. Meals have a beginning and they have an end. Movies have a beginning and they have an end. Relationships have a beginning and they have an end. Songs have a beginning and they have an end. Nothing in this life endures forever except God's steadfast love. It's the only thing that endures forever. Well, fast forward to John chapter 21. You don't have to turn there. I know some of you visitors probably have your Bibles because you're a hell of a lot more spiritual than the people who regularly come to the sanctuary. Sanctuary people, look around. See all the people with Bibles, okay? More shame, Jean, more shame. You're all unclean. Unclean. This is a leper colony. It's a leper colony in here. John chapter 21, beginning in verse 15. This is after the crucifixion. Remember Jesus said, after I'm going to die, and I'm going to rise again, and then I'll meet you over there. And he did. Died, rose again, met them over there. Chapter 21, verse 15. After breakfast, this is on the beach, early in the morning. I'm not sure, Bible scholars aren't entirely all in line with one another on this. I'm not sure if this is the very first time that the disciples saw Jesus, but some believe that it was. Jesus shows up on the beach early one morning. They're out there fishing. They come in. They see Jesus. This may be the very first time Peter is seeing Jesus after the crucifixion. And Jesus says to him, beginning in verse 15, after breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, Peter replied. You know I love you. Then feed my lambs, Jesus told him. Jesus then repeated the question, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord, Peter said. You know I love you. Then take care of my sheep, Jesus said. A third time he asked him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt that Jesus asked the question a third time. He said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, then feed my sheep. Now, it kind of feels like Jesus is rubbing Peter's failure in his face. Asking him 3 times, mirroring the 3 times that Peter denied him, like he's just pouring salt in the wound. You love me? You made this mistake before. Be careful how you answer this. You love me? You love me? Like he's just reminding him of his sin. Reminding him of his greatest failure. But that's not what Jesus is doing. In fact, he's doing the exact opposite. He's giving grace to Peter. Jesus recommissions Peter 3 times to match the 3 times Peter denied Jesus. And that shows us that Jesus' forgiveness matches and ultimately overpowers our failures. His love is so great that he even fits our failures into his future for us. It was only after Peter failed that Jesus said, feed my sheep, not before. If you think your failures get in the way of God using you, that's the stuff he uses. That's the stuff he uses. Not the stuff that you think is good and clean. It's this stuff. I mean, how? That just upends almost everything religion has to say about who's qualified to speak and preach and lead. Everything. You don't have to go further than right here to go, we need some honest, dysfunctional, self-aware misfits leading the way who have dirt under their fingernails and failure on their resume. This is what Jesus does. He picks the guy. And then further along, he says, you are the rock, Peter, that I'm going to build my church on. I'm going to build my church on the back of failed people, broken people, misfit people. That's who I use. You've heard me say this before, but God only loves and uses bad and weak people who fail because there aren't any other kinds of people. We have this mistaken notion that strength and success is what makes us effective witnesses to God's grace. And if we blow it, we're disqualified. Go sit in a corner. Go, I can't tell you how many times people told me after my crash and burn 10 years ago, go sell cars, go sell insurance. I literally heard a pretty prominent pastor in Southern California say to a group of men in ministry training, watch your character because in the ministry you have one shot. If you fail, you're done forever. And I'm like, I'm so grateful God's not like that. My God, I'm so grateful God's not like that. Here, Jesus shows that failure is a unique qualifier. I mean, you've heard me talk about this before, but recovery places have figured out that the best people to reach those who have bottomed out are those who have bottomed out themselves. And I know that the church could learn a lot from that. That the church should take its cues from the recovery community, not the other way around, when it comes to that stuff. I mean, who better to speak of the welcome back love of a patient father than prodigals who ran away from home and ended up in a pigsty? Who was more grateful in that parable at the end? The younger brother or the older brother? Dotted the I's, crossed the T's, kept the rules, did the right thing all the time, and as a result, believed he deserved a party. Or the younger brother who heads home with his head hung low, marred by guilt and shame, and before he can even get a confession out of his mouth, his father runs to him, hugs him, and says, shut up, we have a party to go to. I mean, who's the one that's more great? Those who have been forgiven much, love much. And it's not that we all haven't been forgiven much, it's that those who know how much they have been forgiven love much. Who better to speak of the destructive nature of sin and the gloriousness of God's grace than people who have bottomed out? Jesus never, not once, you will never find this one time in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. Jesus never looked around the room for the most obedient person to go and tell others about him. Never. He always sent stumblers and sinners, those who had failed. I find that remarkably comforting. Remarkably comforting. Well, that's not the end of the story, because you'd think that after his humiliating experience, Peter would have been cured forever from his tendency to fail God. Like that was it. One and done. I mean, I denied even knowing Jesus hours after I said I would never abandon him. The rooster, the look from across the courtyard, the shame, the guilt, I'm cured forever. I will never, ever deny God again. From this point forward, my love is going to be steadfast. Okay? You'd think that he had learned his lesson, that Peter would have been cured forever. But like the rest of us, Peter is a repeat offender. The same thing that he did in denying Jesus the night he was arrested, he does again in Galatians. Jesus has already ascended back to the Father, and Peter is confronted by the Apostle Paul because Peter goes to this particular region, and there was a lot of religious pressure. I mean, things were really mixed up. Things were being changed by the minute, that Jews and non-Jews were all together under the banner of the gospel, and there were a lot of religious Jews during that time who didn't like that. We like having exclusive rights to God. And we believe that in order to be right with God, we have to still keep the Old Testament law. So they were demanding that all of the Gentiles coming into the faith needed to be circumcised. In other words, you need to become like us if you're going to fit. And Peter was in that region feeling the pressure. And when Paul gets there, he realizes that Peter, because of that pressure, is not interacting at all with the Gentiles. He's, again, saving his own ass over here by hanging out with the Jews and only the Jews and kind of, talking about the Gentiles over here and just steering clear of all that. That was another denial of Jesus. Another. Literally, you'd think, like, how could you not? You read that and you go, how did you not get it, dude? It was just, I don't know how long after this, maybe a few years. You're doing the same thing. So do I, man. My God, I'm 52 years old. I think by now I would have stopped doing certain things, stopped thinking certain ways, stopped pursuing certain things. I'm a repeat offender, just like Peter. We all are. We all make our way, despite our promises, we all make our way back to those same broken cisterns, whether in act or in mind. We do it. Even if we don't choose to indulge, the very fact that we want to indulge is a repeat offense. We are inevitably going to offend over and over again for the rest of our lives. So thankfully, since our failures are not a one and done deal, thankfully God's grace and forgiveness is not a one and done deal. He doesn't stop. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. I'm going NIV on that one, okay? Never ceases. Okay, the steadfast love of the Lord never, circle it, underline it, highlight it, never ceases. Not the steadfast love of the Lord will take you a long way, but if you keep doing the same stupid stuff over and over and over again, you're going to hit a ceiling. Never. The steadfast love of God never ceases. He keeps reaching down into the same messes we make time and time again, pulling us out of the graves that we dig with our own hands. Graves built on lies, selfishness, arrogance, greed, lust, fear. And he keeps loving us back to life over and over and over and over again. Over again. And the cherry on top is that your constant wandering doesn't annoy him. It actually gives him a reason to do what he loves to do. Come after you. Over to prove to you. How else is he going to prove to you that his steadfast love never ceases? How else? You walk, you run, you walk, you run, you walk, you run. He comes. He comes after you. He comes after you. The hound of heaven comes after you over and over and over and over and over again. And in that, we discover that his steadfast love endures forever. Never ceases. Never ceases.